Good day, everyone!
Welcome to our page, ang kaibigan ni Piloso Potasio.
And welcome sa panibagong session, which is the Santakan Session! Kasama ko nga pala si
Lapu-lapu.
Si Bangus.
and si Piret. And today, we'll be tackle what really education is in the perspective of Plato. So, what is education?
Why we need to study?
What is the importance of education?
So, without further ado, let's go! So, education plays a vital role in the building the society. It can be a tool for honoring the minds of every citizen. Thus, it is equivalent to enter the realm of education for us to have a direct information. That's why today, we will be going to present the philosophy of education by Plato.
Plato's theory of education.
Plato is one of the well-known ancient philosophers, yet also one of the most profound teachers of the history, whom we can look upon as we try to discover the realm of education. By that being said, we will be going to dissect Plato's theory of education and try to represent its current relevance to our present educational system, in which Plato laid most of his philosophies there systematically, as well as some of the application of his theories on politics, ethics, epistemology, and so on, and significantly also in education. However, in this presentation, we will be going to focus on his philosophy of education. As we dig through this, we will be able to find its apparent connection towards Plato's other philosophy.
Onset, Plato's theory of education is greatly rooted on his concerns towards the political sphere. Plato was concerned on inquiring the underlying importance of having the right political system in order to build the right society. Thus, Plato's theory of education is important in his political theory. That is in the same sense why Plato was also concerned on how we can be able to educate the society and its citizens. Hence, in order to build the best society, Plato envisioned that the people must be enlightened first. That is why Plato considered education as one of the greatest things in life. For him, it was an attempt to touch the evil and at its source, and reform the wrong ways of living as well as one's outlook towards life. Education must nurture the soul of every citizen. For Plato, the human soul can be either to be starved, nourished, or poisoned. Remember that in his allegory of the cave, Plato depicted the prisoners of the cave whose whole life were being covered by darkness. This darkness is the presentation of their ignorance. That is why, to those who are covered by darkness, is also vulnerable to deception. In connection, Plato envisioned that every citizen of the society to find the light and break out from the darkness of ignorance. Indeed, the object of education is to turn the soul towards the light. Plato stated that the main function of education is not to put knowledge to the soul, but to bring out the talents in the soul by directing towards the right objects. It is also to nurture the growing soul, or for the adjusting its surroundings to its higher needs.
Now, as we have already discussed how Plato gives such importance in education, let us now proceed on the contents of his theory of education. First, education is important in order to determine the philosopher king. That is why, for Plato, we must identify the dominant trait of an individual. As I have already mentioned, the pursuit of education is actually to bring out the talents of every individual. Plato regarded the human soul as complex, in which it is consisting of three parts, forms, or kinds. These three are the appetitive, the spirited, and the philosophic or rational. Remember that Plato classified these three in hierarchical system. The appetitive in the lowest, next is the spirit, and the highest is the rational.
The first class of the tripartite soul as the basis of education of Plato, the first is the producing class. A person by whom his soul is inclined to appetitive is someone who is directed to bodily appetites or desires. The degree of education of which the appetites are capable is expressed by his own word taming, and by this is seen to mean such a regulation of them as shall prevent them from interfering with the higher physical activities and train them to contribute to the good of the whole soul. and at the basis of healthy physical life, which is the necessary groundwork of those activities.
The second is the fighting class. The second is the spirit. A person who is more inclined to this is described as the one who possesses the indispensable foundation of courage. That element of hardihood and intrepidity which is common to men with dogs and horses, and which makes them never say die. At the same time, it is represented as a source of pugnacity and aggressiveness, with their possible developments into ferocity and cruelty. It is this in the form of honorable pride which makes them face danger without flinching and prompts them to measure themselves against others. That is why it is necessary that it must be stimulated by athletic activities.
The third class is the ruling class. The last and highest form of the soul is the philosophic or rational. A person who is more inclined to this form is said to be has felt in one form or another the power of knowledge. Plato considered this person as who possessed the reason in its regulative and thus the ruling capacity. That is why philosopher kings' souls are more of a philosophic or rationally inclined.
Now, as we have already tackled, the tripartite soul is the basis of education according to Plato. Now let's proceed to the state-sponsored education idea of Plato. Plato envisioned for a state-sponsored education for both men and women. Every citizen must undergo compulsory training in order to fit to any classes in which I already discussed earlier. This is because Plato believed that every member of the society, though they will each have their own specific role in society later in life, must all have equal education at the start for their training. Hence, Plato believed that it was the means for a ruler to shape its people's belief and provide them with patriotic devotion towards their state and the duties they needed to perform.
Now, let us proceed to the Plato's scheme of education. The first stage is the early stage. Plato believed that education must start in an early age in order to enhance the children for the pursuit of knowledge.
Moreover, he also laid some standards in which, according to him, students must to be situated in an environment that is healthy, that is able to supply an atmosphere that can implant ideas and goodness to the students. The education of childhood should lay a foundation of character which will not have to be cut away as years go on, but will invite and sustain the superstructure of manhood. The education of the Athenian students was comprised of certain amount of mental cultivation, as well as athletic exercise. Besides from reading, writing, basic mathematics, it is also consisted of mainly in reciting and learning the art of poetry, along with the art of music or drawing. Plato was against to the use of force in education. He stated that knowledge which is acquired under compulsion obtains no hold in the mind. In that matter, he pointed out that early stage of learning, students must learn by doing. That is why children in the early stage must love to go and stay and play with the things that enhance education.
Moreover, early education is divided into substages. It is the first substage and the second substage.
First substage, according to Plato, up to age 6, both boys and girls were having equal opportunity. This stage depicted as a stage that uses the language in which they can understand, or what we call the mother tongue. They were taught through the use of literature. Its purpose is to develop the right kind of attitude. The second substage, 6 to 18 years old, were taught music and gymnastic for spiritual softness along with physical toughness. The term music refers to the education of literature. Meanwhile, the term gymnastic was understood to be the whole system of diet and exercise. However, this will be varying based on the customs of different states. Music and gymnastic might intuitively depicted as the mental to bodily training, but Plato would rather call it, saying that the primary object of this are not the body, but the parts of the soul. Accordingly, the truth is that music educates not the soul merely, but specifically the philosophic or the rational, through the medium of the eye and the ear. Plato theorized that through the gentle, responsive, and loving element of literature, that the soul is being opened, in which makes it quick to assimilate, ready to obey, and to imitate, open-eyed and open-eared to catch the sights and sounds of the living world. He regarded the purpose of musical education as of the to satisfy the person's craving with the right food, to offer true nobility to his admiration and true beauty to his love, to keep his perceptions wakeful and clear, to refine and balance its emotions. Meanwhile, the gymnastic by bodily exercise is to develop the element of spirit. Proper gymnastic will discipline the wild impulses of violence and pugnacity, developing the intelligent courage of the citizen soldier, instead of the blind ferocity of the barbarian or the wild beast, while it will counteract the yielding, voluptuous, or nervous tendencies by encouraging competition, endurance, and presence of mind. After the second substage, there will be a screening, in which this will be the course of their education. If a student will pass the screening, he will enter the second screening for the higher education. However, those who will fail will be directed to the producing class. Thus, the conclusion for their failure is rooted to the idea that he or she may be inclined more into appetitive element. To those who will pass the screening will start to enter the military education. After this, the students will enter the second screening, in which to those who pass will proceed to the higher education, and to those who will fail will be directed to the warrior class. The conclusion for their failure is also rooted to the idea that he might be dominated by the spirited element. Now we will proceed to the higher education. To those who pass the second screening will proceed to the higher education. They will receive another 10 years of education training in body and mind. This stage, apart from physical and mathematical sciences, subjects like arithmetic, astronomy, geometry, and mathematical sciences and dialectics were taught. For example, Platonic education in science and dialectic mainly in its formal aspect, and we have found it as a method for leading the soul from the stage in which its knowledge is held in a form of opinion and imagination to that in which it is held in the form of intelligible system. Note that only those who are considered to be philosophers are allowed to teach or to learn this kind of subjects, for it is unfitting to include the warrior class or the producing class based on their dominant elements of the soul. Meanwhile, all the students taught on this stage will be philosophers, men with dominating reason and wisdom. This dominant reasoning must undergo thorough polishing. At the age of 30 years old, again, the students would take another examination in which it will serve as the elimination test that is much severe from or done the first test. Those who did not succeed would become executive assistants, auxiliaries, and military officers of the state. Plato stated that based on their capabilities, candidates would be assigned into a particular field. Those who passed the examination would receive another 5 years advanced education in dialectics in order to find out as to who was the capable of freeing himself from the sense perception. The education system did not end here. Candidates had to study for another 15 years for practical experience in dialectics. Finally, at the age 50, those who withstood the hard and fast process of education were introduced to the ultimate task of governing their country and their fellow beings.
The philosophy of education by Plato depicts actually a kind of state that is centered on education, a community that is exhibiting knowledge, wisdom, and virtues. The state can only survive if its citizens were able to receive education that enables them to make rational and political decisions. To study is an act of service to the state. According to Plato, the whole of the state, each member only preserves his true individuality so long as he takes his proper place in the organization of labor, and loses it when he ceases to do so. So in universal order of existence, each constituent not only is understood but subsists only so far
as it remains true to its place in the order, and as that place is determined by ruling principle and or good of the order, it is ultimately that it owes what it is.
That's for today.
So I hope you learned something.
That's the theory of education according to Plato.
Thanks for watching.